Well, good evening. This is Gary Green, the Genealogist General, and we're set to start Genealogist General Forum number 5. We have a guest speaker tonight, Ron Bearden, who's the Alabama State Registrar. All administrative concepts, I want to make sure that everybody's aware and is passing on to your chapter registrars that contact of the genealogy staff needs to be limited to the state point of contact once something is going. Still have some folks who are trying to contact the genealogy staff either by email or by telephone calls. And this is particularly concerning in pending applications because everybody wants to fix that pending application, but we need to start emphasizing it needs to go through the state point of contact. I'm still concerned about administrative errors. These are errors that have to do with the birth certificates or the DAR not being the proper format or not being completely copied, or we have dates. We still have somebody that put in dates that were in the wrong format. So we've got to put some effort into that to eliminate those errors so that we don't have to go back and say, oh, please sign this document one more time. So with that, I'm going to ask Ron Bearden. I'm going to stop sharing, and Ron, if you can share your presentation, we can start off with your briefing.
Okay. As I look at the audience tonight, I've kind of got a little bit of cold feet because I only see about a couple thousand years of genealogical experience out there. And I know some of you guys have been doing this a long time. A little bit about me. If you don't know me, I've been the State Registrar in Alabama for a little over 18 years. And in that time, I've probably reviewed around 3,000 applications. I've personally sponsored close to 300 members in this time period, and also I've done a little bit of this, but I like I say, I see a lot of you guys out there, and I know that your credentials are much more bountiful than mine are. So maybe something I can say. I'm really hoping that the younger, lesser experienced people will have logged on tonight, and we'll see how this goes. So this is application preparation, a guide for registrars to take points of contact on common errors with suggestions on improving the quality of applications. I've got there, maybe that'll go away. Okay. All right, acceptable SAR application forms. SAR accepts forms revised 2017 or later, created by using Cox, the PDF, Microsoft Word, or the online application. Sometimes we call it the digital application form. My version of Cox is around 2020, I think. On PDF, it says 2017, and on Word, it says 2017. In Alabama, we use Cox and we use the PDF. We have used Microsoft Word some, and we used it more. If you remember a few years ago, some of us were experiencing some problems with variable size fonts. And so we didn't have that to contend with if we used the Microsoft Word version. And so there were a few people we put on that were having the problems until we figured out how to fix the variable size fonts. And once we figured that out, it was a software issue. And then we just had the people download a little bit different version of the PDF software, and everything got cured with that. The online application, we do not use much at all. The state genealogist, Earl Gillian, understands how to fix the workarounds on that, and he uses it and all, but we don't talk about that much in Alabama, and the reason is I've used it some and experimental purposes, but there's still some workarounds that I don't want to have to try to fix all the workarounds when they come to me. So we just use the PDF and the Cox, and when the powers that be fix the online application, then we'll start using that. I had a guy call me several years ago who said, I'm interested in SAR. And I said, well, I'm going to send you an application form. He said, well, I filled out the one online. I said, well, I'll look at it. So I brought up the dashboard and looked at the application. And he had completed an application. It was 27 pages long. And so I said, no. And that's another reason we don't do it, because, one thing that I've been in SAR long enough, over 30 years, and I believe in the integrity of the record copy. And those are kind of strange words maybe, but with some of the, even Microsoft Word, if you're not careful, you can extend one single line onto another piece of paper. You have to know what you're doing using both the online and the Word. And so we just don't use it, because we got a lot of guys that, if they're having trouble with Cox and PDF, they're certainly going to have trouble with some of the others. And we've got some very capable registrars in Alabama too. We've got everything from the low end that are just now learning, and I have to work with them a lot. And then we have guys who have a lot of experience and do a lot of applications. All right. Every application preparer should read the application preparation guide and the genealogy committee policy book. With as many changes as we have incorporated, even in just the last year, since last spring, I don't see how anybody can adequately complete an application nowadays without having read both of these books. And yeah, sometimes we understand some of the things. We don't have to read it word for word, but I think we need to go through it, and things that we may have a question about, we need to refresh our minds and see what the current policy is. Common errors with applications is the paper and the printing. The paper, we must use an 8.5 by 11 piece of watermark SAR bond paper. I have received SAR applications done on DAR paper, and I usually hold up every application that I get to a light to make sure I can see the watermark. Printing, a couple of things. One, it must be printed on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and the size of the application that you print must fill up the paper. You can't print an 8.5 by 11 size application on the 8.5 by 14 piece of paper and expect it to pass, because it's not. The other thing I'll say about printing, and I always get some controversial remarks when I say this, there used to be, and I've been around a while, so I can say used to be maybe, there used to be at one time, good many years ago, in one of the manuals, stipulation that said you had to print it with an inkjet printer, and there's a reason for that. Ink seeps into the paper and will not rub off. A laser printer, that substance kind of bonds to the surface of the paper like a copier toner would. And I have seen applications where it has rubbed off. And then when I ask for a record copy of an application, I get the rubbed off version of the record copy, because that's the only thing they've got in the drawer. And they pull it out, make a copy, and stamp record copy on it. And you can't read it because it's all rubbed off. Inkjet will seep into the paper, and that's the only thing I've ever used. And And there's a reason, and that's because the laser works, and actually all of this stuff works good with just regular typing paper, but for bond paper, it's, I don't know, it's thicker paper and all that, it just doesn't seep into the paper at all. Okay.
Don't you mean 8.5 by 14 paper instead of 8.5 by 11?
Well, I made a reference to the 8.5 by 14, but I said you can't print an application in 8.5 by 11 size on an 8.5 by 14 piece of paper. In other words, you can't use the full sheet of paper and print a smaller application on it. You got to print the application full size.
In Kentucky, all but one of my chapters, we all use the online application and have no problems with it.
Well, you know, if you got your people trained to it, that's fine. We in Alabama, our people prefer PDF and they prefer Cox, you know, and we're just kind of waiting until the first example I did with the online, it printed in a size 12 font, or maybe it was a little bit smaller, I'm not sure, or a 10 font or an 8 or something. Anyway, I called Bill Mars, who was living then and the chairman of the IT committee, and I said, how do I make the adjustment and fix this? And his response was, you can't. And he pulled it up and printed it on his printer, and it was a different size font. So on my printer, it's printing one, and on his printer, it's printing another one, and nobody knew how to fix it. So that's an issue too, you know.
Have a question.
All right.
Okay, you keep mentioning 8.5 by 11. I have never seen any SAR paper, archival paper.
I don't think you're listening real closely. I made a reference to the size of the application, but I said an 8.5 by 14 piece of paper. In other words, you can't print the small application on the big piece of paper. Okay. You can't print the application like it's a miniature application, like the record copies. I didn't say 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. Okay. The paper is 8.5 by 14.
Okay. And then I always use PDF for years because Word, like you said, really went kittywampus, and I have never used the one that's online because I not like it.
Yeah, and I'm not gearing this particularly toward any particular application itself. You know, the Cox or the PDF or the online. What I'm going to say is going to be for all of these things. I will show an example on maybe one application where I did use Cox as an example, but this is not specifically for Cox or any particular application brand. Okay. All right. Common errors. Make sure you print the application as a legal size document. That means 8.5 by 14. There can be no more than 5 very minor hand corrections in black ink. That's important. And, you know, we used to do a lot of hand corrections, many more than 5. And they said, well, 5's the limit. So and I do get applications where I could probably make more than 5 hand corrections. I only make the corrections that are just absolutely necessary. And if there are other corrections to be made, I leave that to the staff in Louisville to make. But 5 is the limit. Okay. The SAR application must be printed on both sides of the paper. You cannot print the front page of the application on one piece of paper and the back of the application on a different piece of paper. It's got to be front and back. And then if the page, and with some, with Word and with the online application, it can extend to another piece of paper. And that's fine. Of course, there are requirements about where the breaks must be and all that. But if your application is say 3 pages long, then you're going to do front and then back, and then then on the second piece of paper you're going to have the other one, and all of that has to be the SAR watermark bond paper. Okay. All right. Next, let me see if I can get this. There we go. Maybe. All right. All right. Any questions about any of that? And I think that clears up the thing about the paper size and all. Okay. All right. The applicant must provide a birth certificate which states his gender as male, or must provide a court order stating the same. So gotta have that, and I'll look at every birth certificate, make sure it says he's a male. Most modern birth certificates do. I've not seen one which did not, unless it's a hospital a birth certificate. Sometimes they don't have the gender on it. Sometimes State Department birth certificates or birth registrations don't have a gender. They're a little inconsistent, but it must state the gender is a male. The applicant must sign the application unless another person is allowed to sign in their behalf. I'm getting a lot of noise. If your mic is on, would you please mute everybody? Unless you're going to speak.
I just unmuted to ask a question.
Okay.
Shep Hamilton, Georgia. I have seen birth certificates that listed the sex as boy,
That's fine. As long as it's boy or male, it's good.
but it doesn't say male.
That doesn't have to. As long as it says boy or male, or indicates through whatever it says that it is a male child, then it's good. Boy or male is fine. Either one is fine.
Ron, can I ask you a question? Joe Fitzpatrick from New York.
Sure.
With this WAP situation, especially in New York, they're going to be doing away with the sex on the birth certificates. What are we going to do then?
I'm not sure I'm high enough on the food chain to answer that question, Joe. I can tell you what the manual says, and it says that the birth certificate must say his gender is male.
I understand that, but if you get a birth certificate now up here, they're coming down to a point where they're not going to put any sex on the birth certificate.
Well, and once again, I would say you're going to have to ask that question to somebody higher up the food chain, because it's not me. I can't address that because I'm not setting the policy.
All right, no problem.
Okay. All right.
I have just a comment that should go into the system somewhere. Steve Quay here. An alternative to a court order on the gender of the applicant would be to do a DNA test to show that they have the XY chromosome. I mean, that would be cheaper, easier than having to go to court over it, but I don't know how to get that into the system.
I don't know that our DNA policy addresses that specific aspect at this time.
No, I know it doesn't, and that's what my point is.
Yeah,
Maybe
I
we
mean,
need
that's
to anticipate
something
that.
that I would think that would need to be suggested to the chairman of the genealogy committee in lieu of a birth certificate which does not state gender. But that's something that I think that'll have to go on the policy. Right now, this is the policy. Okay. All right. The applicant must sign the application unless another person is allowed to sign. I have people ask me all the time, says, well, I'm getting this for my father as he's 87 years old, and I'm getting this for him as a surprise or as a gift. Can I sign it for him? And all I can say is to the person, it is a policy that the applicant must sign that piece of paper. Now, when I print these out, I'm going to send it to you to obtain his signature. And that's all I'm going to say. Okay.
Ron, Dennis Van Ormer, if I can make a comment.
Sure, Dennis.
What we did, we have the same issue. I found it works very well. Also because half the time somebody calls up and they say, I want to give my father, son, brother membership and on his birthday in 2 weeks. And that just doesn't quite work out as well.
Right. Yeah.
So what I generally say, look, we can't do that. He has to sign it. So do this. Let's fill out the application. Let's get it all together, get it ready, get it all printed up, and then present the application to him on his birthday and have him sign it. I've never had anybody complain about it. They always
That would be
like that as an
way to handle
alternative.
that. Yeah, Dennis, that's a good suggestion.
It just, it's another way to do it, and you're not worried about sidestepping the requirement.
Right. Yeah. And I'm not there, I don't know who signs the things. I'm not there anyway if we do these things and mail them to the applicants, who knows who signs them, it could be the gardener or the guy next door for all I know. But that's a good way to handle things, Dennis. Thanks for that suggestion. I think I'll use that here in Alabama when that rears its ugly head again. Okay, let's move ahead. CAR transfers. CAR transfers must include a birth certificate stating his gender as a male. They must provide a record copy of their CAR application. Now, this came up a little while ago, a year ago, maybe. We had a CAR record copy that was not stamped CAR record copy. So I called CAR. It looked like a record copy, but it didn't have a stamp, so I called CAR. This is the thing, and this is what CAR told me. If it is a request in writing, in a letter, or anything like that, where they have to print out of their system, out on the computer, a copy of that paper, they stamp it CAR record copy. It has a stamp. But if the request comes electronically in the form of an email, where they do a reply to the email, they simply attach from their system, their computer system, the CAR paper. It does not have a record copy stamp on it, but it is a record copy. Okay, so you may get a CAR paper that is a record copy, but not stamped. That is possible. Okay. All right, the other thing you have to have is a valid CAR certificate of good standing. That means they have to be a member of CAR at the time they intend to transfer to SAR, either as a junior member or as an adult member, okay? But they got to have the CAR certificate of good standing to do that. All that has to take place.
Ron,
Yes.
this is Chris Mitson from Maryland. I'm actually an officer in CAR. My understanding that you cannot retrieve someone's CAR application. Only that person can retrieve the application. The only thing that-
Yeah, I'm not arguing that point. I'm saying
Right.
if the parent of the CAR member requests the record copy,
Right.
if they do it electronically, they're going to get a CAR paper that does not have the stamp.
Correct.
Yeah,
And-
I'm not talking about who does the requesting.
I'm
talking about-
just saying that out loud for everybody else in the room.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
So-
Thanks, Chris.
So, yeah.
All right, citing the service to Patriot on the front of the application. Everybody gets this confused. This, on the front of the application, this is what he did, not the source. On the front of the application, it says, who assisted and established American independence while acting in the capacity of. This is what he did. Private, South Carolina. Captain, North Carolina Continental Line. Juror, South Carolina, and that would be CS, civil service preceding that, or patriotic service, took oath to enter land or whatever, or supplied 100 bushels of corn over patriotic service. That's what he did, not the source for the information. The source is different, okay? All right, date formats.
Just a second, Bobby Holtz has a question. I
Okay.
think a slide back.
Yeah, Ron, and it was curious that you brought up this thing about CAR application at this time, because I've got one sitting here right now that I'm working on. And I have a copy that was given to me by the parent. The parent is the applicant for an SAR application. What do I need to go with this besides a birth certificate as far as a proof? This is all signed off by the genealogist and everything, but it does not have a signature of the senior national registrar. And when I questioned that, this was from February 27th. It was signed off by the genealogist on the 8th of March this year. And the dad would like to join on this same line. But the senior national registrar, from what I found out, has not been to work since this was done. So they're just sending them out. How do I handle that? And is that legitimate proof of service to use a CAR application for the parent of a CAR?
I don't think I've ever had a CAR paper used for an adult that was not the CAR member. I think that question probably needs to be addressed to Denise Hall.
Ron,
In all the years, I've done a lot of CAR transfers, but they've always been the CAR members who are using the paper, not their parent. So I don't know. I can't tell you that.
I can answer the question.
Okay, Christopher. go ahead.
Basically, they're using their child's CAR application. So the only thing they need to support with it is a copy of the birth certificate. It needs to accompany their child's CAR application. That's
Okay,
it.
that's kind of what I was told by Tim Peterman, our state registrar. But because this record copy does not have the signature of the senior national registrar on it, because they haven't been working, but they sent it out. That was what my worry was of using it. But it is signed off and dated by the genealogist that approved it.
And it already has a national number stamped to it.
No, because the registrar has not been to work to do that.
So Norm Peters signed it.
Theodora Lucas signed it.
Okay, Theodore. Theodore's new. Norm Peters was there for years. So I guess we need some statement, or someone needs to, in the uppity up, need to call CAR
It
to
sounds to me
verify.
like it's an incomplete record copy, and I don't know how to address that. I think that's gonna have to be addressed by the staff or the genealogist general or somebody, but it's not, I don't think any of us can really address that.
Yeah,
It's
'cause
it's incomplete.
Yeah, as you can see on here, it's all the check marks are on it and everything like that. And in the letter that came from Theodora, the fact that it didn't have a record copy number or a member number on it is because that staff person has not been to work. And they don't have anybody else to do that.
Usually what the process is what I initially had said. What we have here is an issue which either staff or Gary Green or someone needs to call CAR headquarters and get a clarification of what's going on so that the staff can be informed that in case this happens for a longer period of time.
Yeah, I just thought it was very unusual that, this thing was approved on the 8th of March and there's still nobody there at the registrars to give them the national number.
Okay.
You guys
All
go
right.
ahead.
Let's move ahead, okay? And all right, date formats. Any date entered to the SR application must be in one of the following formats using a 2-digit day followed by a 3-letter month followed by a 4-digit year. Now, if you have a complete date like 03, April 1975, that's what you need to use. You cannot simply use a single digit day like 3 April 1975. You've got to put the 0 in front of single digits. If you don't know the exact date, you can put April 1975 or just the year 1975. You can also use BEF, AFT, ABT for before, after, and about, and PROB if you have evidence of the approximate date. Please do not use circa, A, or P. Those are now the designations that DAR uses. I got one of those last week, and he had a mixture of BEF, AFT, ABT, PROB, circa, A, and P. He had everything on there. And I sent it back and I said, look, you can't do that. Circa, A, and P are DAR designations, and we don't use those. So let's stick with what we do have, and that's the BEF, AFT, APP, ABT. Okay. All right. Next one. Place names enter the SAR application must be in one of the following formats. So you got to have 2 slashes in the place if you're going to use a place. And I use Birmingham Jefferson in this because I did it for a reason, and that's because they're long names, and I want to show you what can happen. And so we got in the first example, Birmingham / Jefferson / AL, or in all caps, Birmingham Jefferson / Jefferson / AL. Now, all caps takes more spaces than using a combination of upper and lowercase, like in the very first example to the far left, okay? All right, then you can also use, and this is acceptable, never had one kickback for it, you can stick a space before and after the slash mark between the city and county, and also you can stick a space before and after the slash mark between the county and state, okay? You can also do it in all caps that way. If you don't know the city, you start with a slash Jefferson / AL. If you don't know this county, and you just know because of the census record or something way back in the 1860s or whatever, that they lived in, were born in Alabama, lived in Alabama or whatever, / AL. There are cities that are independent cities not associated with a county. Richmond, Virginia is one of those cities. It is not associated with a county in Virginia. So the proper way would be Richmond / VA. I think Baltimore is another one of those. Christopher, is that correct?
Yes.
Hey, Ron, may I make a suggestion?
Yes, Mike.
I live in Kentucky, and I was in Denise Hall's area one day, and we were talking about the 2 slashes when you only list the state. She said that she would rather not see them because when they start photographing them or whatever you call that, where they, to put them online, that the equipment that they use doesn't like the slashes. So you might talk to her about that.
Well, the thing is, I'm trying to go through tonight what we have as policy and accepted standard. And there are a lot of things that I don't particularly like, when I do an SAR application. And I know Denise well, and she's an excellent genealogist, and I know there are certain things that Denise likes and doesn't like. But I would say to Denise or to anyone, if there's something that you don't like about the way that we list this stuff or are told to list this stuff, then it needs to become part of the policy manual. That way we don't have a problem with it, okay? All right, next slide. All right, this is, I think I got a little bit blown there. This is on a Cox right here, or maybe a PDF, I don't know. They both look about the same with some of this stuff. Let me go to the next slide and I'll make a point here. All right, right here, if you look, and I just did a couple of these for an example, using the date formats, 03 June 1964. The first one there using an upper and lowercase June, and the second one using all caps. Doesn't matter. They're both acceptable. Some things matter, some things don't. This doesn't matter. City, county, state, the example above says to do it in all caps. You don't have to do it that way. I don't usually do it in all caps. I use upper and lowercase letters. I don't use spaces between or around the slashes. So I can get Birmingham, Jefferson, and AL all in there. Now, if you use all caps and use spaces, Birmingham space / space, Jefferson space / space, A. There is not another space for the L. If you have long names, and I use Birmingham and Jefferson specifically to point this out, if you have cities with long names, counties with long names, and you use all caps, you're probably not going to be able to get the 2-digit state designation in there. So I would suggest to you that using the upper and lowercase letters, like in the example right above that, is probably a way that's not going to cause you a problem. Okay. All right. DL.
Ron?
Yes.
Ron, one thing I would also point out, with the last slide, specifically if records just have Birmingham written on it, you should not be putting Jefferson down, because if the record doesn't have it written on it, it shouldn't be on there because it's gonna get bracketed.
You're right. You're exactly right. And I've seen some of those recently. And I'll go one step further with that in just a second. If you have a document that just says Birmingham and does not have a county, I've got people now that are going to Wikipedia and printing off a Wikipedia printout on Birmingham, which says it is in Jefferson County. Then you can put Jefferson and you don't have a problem with it. They're going to accept that because you've documented that Birmingham is in Jefferson County. But if you don't have a document that says Jefferson, then the correct way to list this would be Birmingham //AL. Okay. Now, one step further. What if you are going through the father's line on an application, but your mother's a DAR member? So what have we always done? We list mom's DAR number down there. If you don't provide a copy of her DAR record copy, they're going to bracket her number. I've seen that happen. So don't put mom's DAR number unless you want it bracketed, unless you provide a copy of mom's DAR record copy, which there's no need to because you're not going through her lineage.
I have a question.
Yes.
On where you're putting the Birmingham or any, what I put at times when I do not have a city and I just have a county, and I've done this for years and it's always been accepted. I put, let's say, in this case, I put the county name and then just write county and state. And that I've never rejected.
The example given, we're not supposed to say Jefferson County. If you don't have a city, and when you get out into the 1870s, 60s, 50s like that, and people did not live in cities as much, the proper way would be /Jefferson /AL. Okay? That's the way you would do it. All right, moving
This
ahead.
is Jim Falconberry,
Yes,
California. The use of a county from something like Wikipedia is not acceptable because the county may have changed, especially if you're going back 4 generations.
That is true if you're doing that. I think people are using it more for modern things than anything. I don't think I've had anybody use it for an old one anyway.
I can't imagine the genealogy staff would take a Wikipedia about anything.
All right, so why don't we just leave it like we mentioned a minute ago. If you don't have a county, Birmingham //AL. If you don't have a city, it's just /Jefferson /AL. Don't include what is not stated on the document. If you do that, you're on good ground. Okay. All right. Use of DAR papers or DAR papers used with SAR applications. If you use a DAR papers documentation with an SAR application, it must be a DAR record copy. No other type of copy can be used. Now, there was a time when we could use chapter copies or duplicate copies. All right. That changed, and I don't remember when. I would say 5 to 8 years ago. I don't remember exactly. Because I was having DAR ladies who wanted to get their sons and grandsons in, and they were sending me a chapter copy of their DAR paper, and we used those. But then, we made an agreement with DAR that we would not use anything but a record copy. Now, the other part of that is it has to be approved after January 1st, 1985, and start with member number 688702 or higher for universal acceptance unless it's been red flagged, okay, for a specific reason that would disqualify it. You can use a pre-1985 paper if it meets the modern proof standard. I've had a few that did that. Okay, if they don't, then January 1st, 1985 is for universal acceptance. Acceptable DAR supplemental record copies start with ad volume 622 or higher. If it's 622 or higher, then it was also approved after January 1st, 1985. Okay. SAR papers used with SAR applications. We have a little different set of rules. I don't like to use SAR papers unless they're very, very recent. You can get in trouble using those, and that we just have a different set of rules to use SAR papers with SAR applications, or using SAR papers versus DAR papers. All right, so if you're using an SAR paper as documentation, it must be an SAR record copy. No other type of copy can be used. Acceptable SAR record copies are those approved or registered is the correct word after January 1st, 2012. That's a rule that it was changed about a year ago. Start with member number 181935 or higher. Acceptable SAR supplemental record copies are those registered also after January 1st, 2012. Okay, so now, can you use a 2010 SAR paper? Yes, if it meets the modern proof standard. Okay. You can use a 2006. You can use a 1998 if somebody knew what they were doing to begin with and it meets the modern proof standard. All right.
Question.
Yes.
I have an application where the descendant applied for the SAR and was approved, and he knew his descendants. This goes back to like 1850, 1860, and was approved then. But it is, I am having a problem justifying or proving the lineage prior to that. However, the SAR approved it, and the guy knew his grandfather, which is the part that I need to prove.
So
Can you help?
What's the question?
The question is that acceptable? This is like an 1870 application, and the grandfather goes back to knowing that he would have known his grandfather. Their lifespans were the same.
Okay, I don't think it would be an 1870 application because SAR didn't exist in 1870.
I'll have to go back and
it may have been
if you would post your email so I can send it to you. Because
okay, it may have been a 1970 application, but once again,
no, it was not. It goes back. It goes back to the 1800s.
This is the current rule. For universal acceptance, it has to be a 2012, January 1st, 2012 application or later that has not been red flagged for service.
I understand the rule. You don't need to read the rule. I understand that.
Then that's what
the question is there not an exception should the approved member not know an ancestor that is in his application?
Right. To start with, you can't use anything in SAR prior to 1978 because
this is Jim Falconberry again.
Yeah, Jim, go ahead.
The policy manual allows the use of a document that was written by somebody more than 20 years ago that lists the parent and possibly the grandparent. And SAR and DAR record copies of older people are acceptable. I've used an 1896 DAR application for proof of the lineage from the applicant to the patriot who was the grandfather.
Okay, so
perfect. Thank you.
Since you said that, I will tell you this. I did call Denise several years ago on the pretense of asking her a different question. And in the conversation, I said, by the way, I'm going to be sending in an application with a 1920 DAR record copy. She said, Ron, you can't use that. I said, well, if I had a notarized statement from 1920, would you accept that? She said, yes. And I said, then I'm not using this as a DAR record copy. I'm using it as a notarized statement only. And she accepted it. And that was the only place I could prove the lineage for these, to tie in these 3 generations that I had to tie in. And this 1920 applicant was in her 70s at the time. She was born in the mid 1800s, and she had carnal knowledge of her parents and grandparents, and she had all their birth dates listed on the application and all that. And it was notarized. And so Denise accepted it as a notarized statement. Okay. So, you can use earlier papers, but they do have to meet a particular standard. Okay. All right, let's move ahead.
Can I ask one question before we move ahead? It's Kevin Alec from North Carolina, Colonel Alexander Irwin chapter.
Go ahead.
So I've got an applicant that the SAR application was based on 1975 applications. It didn't meet standards. There were 6 applicants approved through 2009. And now I've got an applicant that's using those and has been denied. And he is as angry as it gets, since he's got other distant cousins who are members. The application does not meet standards, and I'm struggling to give this gentleman a professional explanation.
Have you looked on the DAR to see if there's anything with a similar lineage?
No, there's not. To be honest with you, when I looked through the initial 1975 application, I am surprised that it was approved. Unfortunately, there was a number of applications after 1975 that used that initial application and were all approved.
Okay. Well, I would say this. SAR moved from Washington, D.C. to Louisville in 1978. There is no documentation for a pre-1978 application in existence. They lost it all, threw it away. Somebody left it on the loading dock, something. There is no documentation for a 1975 application. Okay. Therefore, there's nothing written on it that would stand the test of time or be able to be validated, because there is no documentation for it. All right. Now, last year, and I was not a member of the genealogy committee at the time when this rule was changed about the January 1st, 2012 date. This is something that I was invited to sit in as a guest, and I did. There was a lot of discussion about that date, whether we should use January 1st, 2012 or a different date. The rule change for DAR papers using a January 1st, 1985 date happened in late 2011. I want to say maybe October, some of you may know, around that time. Well, by January 1st, 2012, all of those papers that were using, all those SAR papers that were using pre-1985 DAR papers had floated through. There weren't any more of those coming through. So they changed the rule to say now that we're going to use January 1st, 2012 SAR papers, because none of them should have used a pre-1985 DAR paper. So they all got acceptable DAR papers on them. Okay. And that's one of the reasons why that was changed. And the staff felt like, and all those that voted for this felt like it was a legitimate change, and I support that change too. Okay. And I've had people that, I had a lady that her husband died. He was an SAR member in Alabama. He died a couple of years ago. Now his sons and grandsons want to become members of SAR. And I looked at the paper and I said, you can't use his paper. He waited too long. A year ago, you could have used it. You can't use it now because it doesn't meet the modern standard. That's the first and foremost thing. It doesn't meet the modern standard. Okay. So we found a DAR paper that had a similar lineage, and we only had to maybe add a couple of other documents for an extra generation or two. It was very easy to do. And now their applications are up to standard, and they do stand the test of time and all that. Okay. We get into a revolving and evolving proof standard. It's changed multiple times over the last 25, 30 years, or even longer than that. For those of you who've been doing this a long time, and when they change the standard to try to call it the more modern proof standard, we've got to go by it. Okay.
I have a question
All
about
right.
all this. For years, when I was the state registrar genealogist for the state of Utah, the standard had always been for DAR papers, they had all the proper check marks. Why did that change?
I just explained that. Then I just also said that you can use a DAR paper prior to 1985 if it meets the modern proof standard. Okay. For instance, if a DAR paper or an SAR paper refers for service to the DAR book indexes, that's not a legitimate citation for service. And I've got a couple or three of those old 3-volume sets. I'm sure those of you who've been around a while have seen those. That is not a legitimate citation for service. If you see something like that on there, you can't use it. Okay. Now you might can use the genealogy, but you're going to have to come up with a new citation for service. And there are also certain things in genealogy documents that are acceptable and are not acceptable. But the standard is it must meet the modern proof standard. Okay. All right, going ahead.
Okay, one other question.
All right.
Recently, I even checked with the genealogist general, is that I had a grandson of a current SAR member and his son, and their applications were quite old. Why couldn't we use those and go as in the past we've had what was called grandfathering?
I think the grandfathering, I may have to call on Gary to answer this. Grandfathering is still in existence. There are some stipulations about grandfathering. If you get an application approved, I think it's in the manuals, best I remember, that you still have to provide the documentation to prove, even though you're grandfathering. And the problem with grandfathering is most people, if they get an application grandfathered, they don't follow through and provide the documentation necessary to get that application up to standard.
Ron, Dennis Van Wormer here. I'd like to
Yes,
comment
Dennis.
on that.
Yes.
I had a couple grandfathered a couple years ago. That's not quite correct.
Okay, so
That is the desire of the staff genealogist.
all right.
But the rule is you can be grandfathered in up to 2 generational links if the record copy that you're using has not been proven to have an error, especially in Patriot service.
Right.
If it's not cited or proven to today's standards, genealogy staff would like you to address those, but that is not a requirement.
Okay. Well, and I'm not as familiar with the grandfathering clause. Frankly, I do not grandfather. I never have.
So my one point there was the grandfathering I used was 2 sons of their father had been admitted in 1975, and in 2019 or 18 or 20 or whatever it was, they applied off of his application. His application was checked to make sure there was nothing wrong with what they had. There was no error proven, and it had a DAR record copy. There was no error proven there. Now we do have the error checking and error corrections available in PRS. So I think that's going to make it a little bit stiffer. But as long as there's no proven error, especially in Patriot service, it is acceptable to use it for up to 2 generations.
Now, when you grandfather one, is there not also a stipulation that it closes that line?
Well, not exactly. They'd like to say that, but not exactly. So when they grandfathered them, these 2 sons, it was stamped on their record copy that they're grandfathered. That means
So
their record copy
their
cannot be
sons could
used.
never, yeah, their sons could never use them.
But now here was the trick on this one. Since they were going off their fathers, that was only one generation. So their sons technically could still go back to their grandfather, which is not grandfathered. It was approved in 1975 regular. They could, so actually you can get one generation, you can get two generations depending on how, but the new member record copy will be stamped grandfathered, and that record copy cannot be used in the future.
So this is the question I ask our applicants. Why not go ahead and do it right to start with and have an application that meets the modern proof standard? And then we don't have to fool with grandfathering. So that, that works too.
And I absolutely agree with you. This is the only grandfathering ones I've done, and it happened because the father was not only still alive, but he's a current member.
Right.
And the two sons wanted to join the same chapter as their dad, and somebody else in that chapter was aware of the grandfathering, so I was like, okay, well, we'll give it a try. But yeah, I don't normally recommend that either.
And before we had this January 1st, 2012 date, I think we probably all used an older application to get sons or grandsons in SAR, because we didn't have a date that we really had to go by that meant anything, but now that we have the 2012 date, and once again, we can use an earlier application, but I just tell them, it needs to meet the modern proof standard. If it doesn't, then we try to beef it up with the proper documents to get it where it needs to be today. And that's, as a genealogist, that's what I want to do. I want to prove the lineage. I want to prove the service by a good standard for today, because it's a lot better than it was 20 years ago. Okay. And then we don't have that problem for the future. All right. Okay. Going ahead. Red flags on SRDAR papers. Make sure that any red flags on the papers do not affect the status of your patriot or the lineage to your patriot. Now, lineage can be specific. So there's two basic types of red flags you need to look for. There are a couple of minor red flag things like future applicants must complete, and I don't even want to get into those. I want to talk about future applicants must prove correct service. Future applicants must prove correct lineage. Let me address service first. Got a fellow in our chapter. He been a member for a long time. He got some years ago, he brought all of his sons in and all of his living grandsons at that point. Well, then about 6 or 8 years ago, he approached me and said, listen, I've got a new grandson. Can you do his application? I said, certainly. Well, when I checked, his patriot had been red flagged. The citation for service that was on the DAR website and on all his was the militia fines list from Delaware. Well, a militia fines list basically means that guy was AWOL on the date that the militia met. And the problem was there was no further record of that militia company after that date. So the last official record of that militia company, he was not there. He was away from his post. That disqualifies him. And so the DAR and subsequently the SAR disqualified him as a patriot because his name was on the fines list. So I called my friend John Sinks and I said, John, do you have the Delaware tax list? And he did. And he sent them to me on a disc. I went through them methodically and found the patriot's name on 4 different lists after the date of the fines list. So we requalified that patriot where he did have militia duty in Delaware. We requalified him as patriotic service for paying a supply tax. So and that was good. So this newest grandson was in on the same patriot, but the patriot is credited with a different service. And so a lot of this acronym FAMPCS if you look at some of the older applications, since we've done all this work on supply taxes and land entries and things like that, swearing oaths and all that in the last 10, 15 years, a lot of these DAR papers and some SAR papers, are red flag because of the service, because of things like the fines list. But if you find an alternate service, then you can requalify them. And that's what I've done on several of these people. Okay. Now, future applicants must prove correct lineage. I had an issue with an application that supposedly got pended 6 or 8 months ago. And on this acronym, future applicants must prove correct lineage. And it says that on the DAR website. And I looked at that, but the lineage problem was that they did not, no one could prove who the wife of the patriot was. That was it. It had nothing to do with the lineage to all of the children. They were all proven by the will and all that. They just could not specifically say who the wife was. And so that's the reason they put this, and that's the correct acronym for that situation. I had no problems with that. But we had a reviewing genealogist who pended the application, said, I can't use that application. And I called her and I said, well, yes, I can, because it's the wife, and I'm not going through the wife. I'm going from the patriot to his children, a specific child. And they wanted to call DAR, which they were granted that privilege. And the DAR said, no, it does not affect the lineage to the children. So the application got approved. So the main thing about proving the correct lineage, a lot of times you'll see it where it goes through a specific child. If he's got 10 kids, it may go through the son Matthew, and your paper doesn't go through Matthew. It goes through John, or it goes through Rebecca, or something like that. Then that red flag does not affect your application going to that patriot. So you have to look real carefully and read the DAR note about service or the lineage to see if it affects the lineage or the service that you're trying to prove. Okay. All right. Citing sources on the back of the application. We are listing documents to prove a younger generation to an older generation. Always list, this is what I tell my folks here, always list the younger generation first, followed by the older generation. For instance, on your birth certificate, if on anybody's birth certificate, you would list the applicant, generation 1, BC of John Smith, listing his parents as Peter Smith and Mary Jones. Okay, you list the younger person first. If you had on a census record, you list the child first in the home of their parents, and I'll get to a couple of those slides in a minute. Well, that's all I'll say on that right now. So you always list the younger person first, then the older person. Okay. Wills I will cover. They're a little different. Everybody always gets those backwards, so I'll talk about those too. All right. Now this is out of the application preparation guide. This section provides guidance on citing sources on the application form. The sources of information can be important for future use. Researchers may wish to determine whether a source of information sheds light on an issue not involved in proving a lineage or service. Incomplete citations such as death certificate, census record, and family history are of little help for future research. While not required, adhering to the following guideline will enhance the future value of our applications. And that's out of the application preparation guide, page 23. Now, this thing about, we've all seen these, where somebody on generation 1 writes simply birth certificate or BC, or they may write death certificate. They may write 1850 census. That doesn't tell us a lot. Who are we talking about? You know, and I always do it a little differently because I want to know 10 years from now, if I want to use that paper as a record copy, I want to know what it says, because when you order the record copy, you don't always get, or you don't get the documents unless you specifically order some of those. And some of those are restricted because of privacy reasons with some of the more recent generations. Okay, now, with that said, let's talk about some of these things about citing records, okay? All right, for a bloodline, this is what I advise my registrars here in Alabama to do. For a bloodline individual, list it this way: a BC, or it can be a birth record, birth index, etc., of John Smith, listing parents as Robert Smith and Margaret Jones. You got all the information you need right there. For non-bloodline, you don't need the parents listed, so just say but BC of John Smith. That's all you got to do, okay? Death certificates. There's a lot of different things we can use as besides death certificates. There's some substitutes we can use. So first of all, yes, if we get the death certificate, that's the best document to use. But we can use Social Security Death Index, which is a transcription of a government record. We can use the Social Security Application Claim Index, which is a transcription of a government record. And we can use the State Death Index, which is a transcription of a government record. Okay? Now, these records, these three records here, do not always tell you all the information you need, because we want the complete name, we want the birth date, we want the death date, we want the place of the birth and the date, place of death, and we also want parents' names if we can get them on these documents. Well, you may not get all that information on Social Security Death Index. If you can't, then look on the Social Security Application Claim Index. You may find some of the missing information from the other one on this one. What about a State Death Index? You may find even more information. You may have to use a combination of 2 or 3 of these, all 3 of them, to get all the information you need. If you do, then use all 3 of them, because they're giving you different information on each one, and they're not all the same, and then none of them are consistent with what they're reporting, okay? Grave markers for names and dates only. If you're going to do a grave marker, do as much of a full page of that as you can where it's easily read, and then print out the Find a Grave page. You can't use the write-up for Find a Grave, but they will accept the cemetery name and location, okay, for the grave markers. All right.
Quick question on grave markers.
Yes, go ahead.
So I've had some grave markers where Find a Grave gives a clear name and date information, but when you look at the headstone itself, the headstone is so old, the picture doesn't clearly relate what's on Find a Grave.
Okay.
Can you still use Find a Grave if the readability of the headstone's not there?
I would not accept it. Now that's me. I would not accept it. You can use the grave marker as documentation, because if you look at some of the write-ups, they will tell you that the guy's name is, if his first name was George, you know what his middle name is going to be, don't you? His middle name is always going to be Washington. That's what people will tell you. And if his first name is Andrew, you know what his middle name is going to be, don't you? It's going to be Jackson, of course. Andrew Jackson Smith, Andrew Jackson Brown, Andrew. If his first name is Andrew, they're going to put Jackson. So what do they do on the write-up? On the write-up, they put Andrew Jackson Brown. But what does the grave marker say? Andrew Brown. You can use what's on the grave marker, not what's on, and none of that stuff that's on the write-up can be used except the cemetery name and location. That's it.
I have a question.
Okay.
Can you use, if the grave itself says wife of,
Yes.
can that be used for the marital relationship?
If it is a period marker,
Of course.
and I have had, I've had people use markers that were obviously, where somebody died in 1890, 1900, and yet it's a 1975 marker. No, I'm not going to accept that. You're supposed to use a period marker. I've had Bible records that I've turned down where the publication date in the Bible is 1810. Now I know what 1810 handwriting looks like. And so what I got from this guy was an 1810 Bible record, but no one had ever filled it out until some modern person wrote in all the names and this very elaborate script, all obviously done in the same handwriting with the same writing utensil. It was all perfect. Well, that's not what you see in a Bible record. I mean, what are the chances of picking up the same writing utensil over a period of 20 years to list 10 kids? That's just not going to happen. And I told the guy, I said, I'm not going to accept it. It's obviously done well after the fact. I don't care what the publication date is. The writing in the Bible is not period writing. It's modern. You can't use it. Same thing with grave markers. If it says wife of and it's a period marker, yes, you can use that. As a matter of fact, I came into the SAR and one of the things back when Susan Acree did my application many years ago, when she was checking it, I had to go to the cemetery and get a picture of the marker of my great grandmother, because that's the line I was going through that said wife of. And that's what I used. Okay. All right. Death certificate or death record for bloodline. A DC, DR, DI of John Smith, listing parents as Robert Smith and Margaret Jones. Same thing as the birth records, except, if it's non-bloodline, you don't have to list the parents. For a non-bloodline individual, a DC death record or death index of John Smith. That's all you got to use. Okay. Now, this is I'm gonna, maybe I need to blow this. I don't know that I can blow it up being out of, uh-oh. Okay, maybe we can see this. The numbers on the right, it came to me, this is actually a record that came to me with an application some years ago. It was not numbered. The generations weren't numbered, and it had a lot of stuff underlined that I didn't feel like it needed underlined. Half of it did not need to be underlined. So I put the designation of the generations in. Some people circle them, that's fine. Some people underline them out there, that's fine, as long as you put them in, okay? If you don't have room, there's not enough margin, I might sometimes even write the number of the generation right next to the name in that space where the name is printed, okay? Now, what is not needed, and I think it says this in the manuals, you do not need to decorate the pages. There is no need to put certificate of death. That's already on this document. There's no need to put where it's at. That's on the document, or the date, or the name. All that stuff's on the document. And if you're going to write the generations 2 to 3, it needs to be up in the upper right-hand corner, not where it's at on the page. Okay. Sometimes guys will print out census records and they got to go back in. They just compelled to go back in. And if it's a 1910 census, in big bold print underneath it, they got to write 1910 census.
A
And
small question.
yes,
Do you recommend putting the ACN number of the application or the Patriot that you're seeking on this? If this piece of paper got blown off the desk, it's going to be.
No, you're talking about the digital applications that pre-assign ACN numbers. If you're doing it on Cox, PDF, or Word, those ACN numbers are not assigned until it reaches national headquarters.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Marriage certificate or marriage record. For any type of marriage record, list information as either a marriage certificate or a marriage record or a marriage index. There's all three of these things are legitimate documents of Robert Smith and Margaret Jones. If the parents are listed on the marriage record, and some do, some of the marriage records are more complete, depending on when and where we're talking about, include their names in the citation, such as marriage certificate of Robert Smith and Margaret Jones, also listing if she's the bloodline, also listing Margaret's parents as Thomas Jones and Mary Brown, because that's genealogical information that's on the document. Okay, Robert's parents in this case would not be important because he's not the bloodline that you're going through. For instance, if it was Robert, then list Robert's parents. I would not list both sets of parents. So always list the parents on the record if they're on there, okay? Census records. All right, now in the genealogy policy manual, I believe it's that one that says to list a census like this. And part of this will be the same. And I'll use this as an example. 1880 census, Jefferson County, Alabama, listing, and I'm going to just use John Smith. John Smith, HH, page 104. Well, John Smith, HH is head of household. John may not be the bloodline that you're going through. So why do we want to list that and not list the bloodline? Why do we want to list the page number? You can't look up a census by page number. You look it up by name or where it's located in the year that you're looking for. So I do this, and this is what I suggest to our registrars here. And this goes back to that thing out of the application preparation guide that I did a little earlier, where it says this is suggested. And that write up in the genealogy policy manual is a suggestion to write it up as John Smith, HH, page 104, okay? I always want to list the younger person in the home first, followed by the parents, okay? Because you're connecting to the next generation. So 1880 census, Jefferson County, Alabama, listing John Smith in the home of parents, Robert and Martha Smith. What about 3 generations on the same census? 1880 census, Jefferson County, Alabama, listing John Smith with parents, Robert and Martha, in the home of Martha's parents, Peter and Mary Jones, because I got an extra generation in there I can do. Hang on a second. I've got this, my little scroll bar here is,
Ron,
yeah, I'm trying to move this thing and I can't. Let me redo this. Okay, I'll get it out of the way. Now let me get back to my page. And I'm almost at the end of this. Well, here we go. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Census record. All right. So this is the second example is when you have John living with his parents, but they're in Martha's parents' home. Okay. So what about if Peter dies and now Martha or Mary Jones is the widow and she's indicated as the widow on the census? So now we're going to put it as 1880 census, Jefferson County, Alabama, listing John Smith in the home of parents, Robert and Martha, because Robert's now the head of the household, along with Martha's mother, Mary Jones. That's still important because it gives Martha a maiden name. Okay. All right. Another example of the extra stuff on the census record. If you're going to put generation 3 and 4, put it up in the upper right-hand corner. But all the extra stuff underneath is not necessary. And that's the end of part 1. Is much now. Is there anybody else got another question?
I have a comment.
Yes.
The comment is back to the census record. Do you want to explain for those in attendance that maybe they're using the PDF version or the Word version that are limited on space on the back of the references of what you would consider pertinent information with regards to what you have here with census that would help the staff or the state registrar?
All right, let me address that, Christopher, because that is a concern, okay? In all the applications I've ever done, I've never had an instance where I could not get all of the pertinent information in those 24 lines. Okay. Now, as another few years goes by and we start, and the Patriots are no longer in generation 7 and 8 or maybe 9, now they're in 11 and 12. Yes, that can become a problem. And we are eventually going to have to move to a form with more than 12 generations. Okay. Now with the Cox, the reason we use Cox is it has so many interactive features on it. For instance, if I do a dad's application and then I need to do his son's, I complete the dad's front and back. And then there's a feature where I can pick everything up on the front, move it down a generation. So now I can put the son in generation 1. And when I move it down on the front, it moves it down on the back too. Okay. So that makes doing that second application or the third application or the fourth application very easy to do because you're just picking it all up, moving it down. Can't do that with a PDF. Okay. And I don't think you can do it with anything else either. All right. So
You can do it with the online.
pardon?
It's also doable with the
Okay,
online.
all right, it is doable with the online. I'm not used to it from that perspective. Oh, now the PDF, how do we get around it with the PDF? With a PDF, you've got 2 locked lines in the PDF for each generation. And so what I tell my folks, if they're doing an application with 7 generations, go down to generation 8, the blank lines, and put an asterisk and renumber it 7 or whatever generation you need to put it, maybe it's 3. And you start down there with what you couldn't put up upstairs in 3 and continue with those lines down there. And that way you can utilize those lines, which would otherwise not be used. We've never had an application kicked back because of doing it like that. And I've got probably half my guys using PDF and half of them using Cox. Okay. So you can use those extra lines on the PDF and just renumber them so that the genealogist can follow the numbering sequence down there below. And it works. Okay.
Ron, let me ask you a question, Joe Fitzpatrick.
Sure, Joe.
What it is my thing is once you get into the second, third, and fourth generations, you have so much more information, which you were just entered. You have to go down to the next slides. It's probably was the answer for it. You don't have the room to put all that on.
Well, that's what I was just talking about.
And I've been doing this since 2007.
Sure.
I'm doing a lot of things the old way because I go to the back and I'll BC and I'll put the number of the birth certificate on it. And I never put the other additional information.
Okay.
So I picked up some information. I picked up some information tonight.
Let me address this again quickly. On the Cox, it's interactive. If I need more than 2 lines on Cox, it'll give me whatever I want to use. I can use 4 lines, 5 lines on Cox, and it'll rob them from 12, 11, 10, like that. Okay. On the back of the application, when I complete it, it may only show 9 generations of documents. Maybe 10, 11, and 12 aren't there because I've robbed those 6 lines and allocated them in other generations. That's what Cox will do. Now the PDF is locked. You've got 24 lines divided from 12 generations, and you've got exactly 2 lines for each generation. That's where we go down to the first empty line and start right there and put an asterisk with and renumber it, and then use that line for whatever generation you need. Okay, but Cox will let you reallocate lines.
All right, thank you.
I have a point of clarification. This is Russ Haynes from California. You made a comment that this format that you're putting is for anything but the digital form.
No, I didn't say that.
Correct?
No,
Because on the digital form, it says, don't put a whole lot of information in there.
I know that. It wants you to keep it brief.
Yes.
And I mean, and once again, you get back to the point, if you're that brief, it goes back to what it says about not putting just census record, not putting just death record, not putting just birth record. And I will eventually go to the digital, everybody will. But right now, Cox is so versatile. I've been using Cox since Cox was invented. Okay. And it just has a lot of great features to it. But I know eventually when we get into a more digital format, we're all going to have to use digital. When we go to digital, I'm going to list my stuff on the application like I've got it here. Because this is the only way 15, 20 years from now, you can go back and see what that death record is talking about, or that birth record is talking about, or that census record.
Well, I only use the digital form.
So
I don't use anything. And so I just want to make certain that I'm not putting information or not enough information in there.
Okay. So if you put the information like and I know the digital form says just list very briefly, don't put all this information. I know it says that. But if you put the information like I've demonstrated here, they're not going to kick it back.
Okay.
I disagree with that. If I've gone over 2 pages on the digital, they've kicked it back. I can't get past the state registrar
Well,
unless the
that's
digital format
between-
is less than 2 pages.
Kevin, that's between you and the state registrar, but digital applications, and Dennis can tell you this, I believe, digital applications can be more than a front and back of a piece of paper.
I'm in complete agreement, Ron. I've submitted not many, but quite a number of digital applications that fall over to the third page, and they've always been accepted by Louisville. And since I was the state registrar, I accepted them too. So
Yeah.
they are acceptable to Louisville. You
Do
got
you ever reduce the size of it from 100% to 90%? On the digital?
What I've done
Yeah.
on the digital applications is I've abbreviated, dropped it down, and put the information on the source documents.
The problem with the digital application, and technically with the Cox, I'll leave that for Ron to comment on, is that they put the additional requirement that you not split the generation between the front and the back. So you have to sometimes use the 90 to 100% printing, or you sometimes have to abbreviate some stuff, or you sometimes have to add an extra line or two to make sure that you get a solid break between the front and back of the page. But other than that, the digital, and like what I hear out of Ron on the Cox, will accept just about anything.
Okay, the front of the application on Cox is locked. It
Okay.
can't shift generations down. Now, the Word will. You can shift down generations on the Word, and you have to split it like you would the digital. Okay, and it can extend to an extra piece of paper. Okay, but once again, I've had a few guys, and this was mostly back when we were doing, when we were having trouble with the variable size fonts that the national finally said, we're not going to take any more like that. And until we found out the resolution of that problem, we had some guys doing applications on the Word form out of a couple of 3 chapters. And I just cautioned them. I said, look, don't let it extend to that extra piece of paper. You should be able to get everything on the front and the back. And if you have a problem, just call me and I'll help you. Well, it all comes down to abbreviations. If you abbreviate things, then you can get it all on. And we never had even a Word form that went to the second piece of paper. You know, we got it all on the front and back just by abbreviations. Okay.
And Ron, I want to, this is Gary Green again. I want to thank you for your presentation tonight. Invite everybody back for next week. I do have a couple of amendments to the discussion. The workarounds that we discussed on the online application are being worked by the powers that be. And we have a couple that have been adjusted, but I'm not comfortable that they're all adjusted. And I'm looking for feedback from folks who use the online, particularly the work on the birth date, if that has been fixed, and the work on the memorial application to see if that has included a death date. Second thing is Wikipedia is not a proper source document. It may have been approved at one time by one genealogist, but normally, because that Wikipedia is not a vetted source, meaning anybody can put anything in a Wikipedia, just like you can in Ancestry. So therefore, it's not an acceptable source. For the future generations or future applicants must prove correct service. I want people to be aware that there are at least 1,091 patriots that have been identified by the DAR, that we have notes in the PRS to advise you the DAR has flagged that patriot for service, including 265 patriots who've been used after 2012. So what I'm trying to get across is beware, look at the PRS, look at the DAR, GRS to make sure if you're going to use that patriot that it hasn't been flagged. And finally, I want to thank Jim Falkenberry and Dennis Van Wormer for doing some clarification on comments that were made, but Ron, this has been a great presentation, and I look forward to anything that we can do next week. It'll be next week on Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So with that, I'm going to close the meeting, and thank you all for your comments and inclusion. And I will be putting this up on the SAR website within a couple days. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
Have a great
gentlemen.
night.
And I appreciate all of you that joined in tonight and but with special clarifications on things.
Night, all. Good